Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at Morphy's taking a look at, I think, a pretty interesting, very rare version of the German K98k Mauser. This is a rifle that at first glance just appears to be a Gustloff production 1944 K98k. However, it's actually a commercial production rifle. This is a gun that was manufactured entirely outside of the stream of military contracting and procurement, and it's a rifle that never actually went to the German army, to the Wehrmacht. And it was assembled in 1944, late 1944, and you might think that's a pretty weird time for guns to be available, military pattern rifles to be available on the commercial market in Germany. Like late 1944, the Wehrmacht kind of needed every gun it could possibly get, and even that still wasn't going to save it. So what's the deal with this rifle? Well, these are guns. There's a batch of commercial production guns like this one, and they all have some little subtle differences to them. They're not uniform because they are late war, scrappy sort of manufacture. But they're assembled largely with parts that are able to be reclaimed from a variety of sources and then assembled by small shops outside of the regular factory system. So this one in particular was assembled by a company called Fritz Langenham, which you may recognize from their production of 32 caliber pistols in World War I. Like Langenham pistols are a neat piece of German World War I history. Well, the shop still existed in Zella-Mehlis. This is the same area where the Walther factory is located. It has a lot of small gunsmithing and gun shop sort of operations. And Langenham, along with some others, late in the war were able to reclaim parts, like leftover parts, extra parts, and in particular parts that had been rejected early in the war for pretty trivial defects. Early in the war, manufacturing standards were really quite high, and some pretty silly things like a defect in the finish or a scratch on the part could get something tossed into a scrap bin. Well, late in the war, a lot of those parts are still lying around in warehouses, and they become available for other companies or for the factories themselves to start using. Well, the next question, I suppose, is why are these guns being made in 44? That one is a question that's open to a bit of interpretation. So before we get to why, let's go ahead and take a closer look at this and let me show you all of the details on it. Overall, this rifle is in really quite nice condition. It doesn't show a whole ton of wear, and that's fairly common judging by the other examples of this sort of rifle that are known. There aren't a lot of them, but this is a group of rifles that are reasonably well known, if not perfectly understood, in the collector's community. So if we start by taking a look at the receiver markings here, we have BCD4. This is a Gustloff production receiver, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was actually assembled by Gustloff. The receiver has the usual Model 98 mark, and then the serial number is just a plain 3315 without any suffix. And then over on the right side, where we would expect to see a sequence of 3 Eagle military proofs for the inspection and firing and final acceptance, instead, we have just one. It is an Eagle over the letter N, which is a commercial proof mark used for non-military weapons, and this diamond over U, which is an unusual mark that doesn't show up on military weapons, but is present on basically all of the known late war commercial guns. So that is almost certainly a proof house or assembly stamp. The bolt is marked on the stem here with the last 2 digits of the serial number. We have a mismatched cocking piece there. And incidentally, an unnumbered safety flag. There are actually a bunch of unnumbered parts in this rifle. And then the underside of the bolt has that same diamond U commercial marking on it. The rear sight is actually a military proofed part, and the butt plate also has a military factory code marking on it. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pull the action out of the stock now so we can see the markings that are on the underside, because those are some of the most important ones. We have, I think, the most interesting marking on the whole thing. That is the serial number, and then FR Langenham, Zella-Mehlis, caliber 8x57 JS. Now, Langenham was a small firearms company in Zella-Mehlis. There were a lot of smallish companies like this in the areas of Germany that had some of the major gun companies. A perfect example would be H&K was founded as this little tiny garage business in the same smallish town that housed the gigantic Mauser Works operation. So Zella-Mehlis is the company that actually assembled this gun and then handed it over to the civilian proof house to be proofed, because this was not manufactured under a military production line. There are a couple other markings here at the base of the barrel. We have a commercial eagle end proof mark and a 944. That would be the date of assembly or the date of proofing, September of 1944, and this proof mark. We then have a barrel steel code A.43. BCD means that this was a barrel manufactured for Gustloff or by Gustloff. And that's pretty much it for markings you can't see from the outside. There's nothing on the inside of the stock cavity here. Actually, there's basically nothing on the stock at all, with the sole exception of a G and a 1 and a little proof mark right there on the wrist of the stock. The bayonet lug here is numbered, but it does not match the rest of the rifle. It does have an Eagle 37 proof, which means it came from, I believe, J.P. Sauer. To me, this is pretty obviously a scrapped part that Langenham was able to recover and use in their rifle assembly. If we look at the trigger guard and magazine assembly, there are no marks on these, no serial numbers or proof marks at all. The question as to why these guns were made and who exactly was getting them is still an open one in the collecting community. There's no hard evidence to prove where these guns went. There are a number of theories that I can share with you. I think the most likely theory to be correct is that these were being used or contracted for by factories or other institutions in Germany that wanted to have some armed guards. Even in the United States during World War II, munitions factories had armed guards, and they were private security. They were either security companies or guards employed by the factory directly. They weren't military personnel, and the same thing was true in Germany. And I can certainly see, as the war starts to approach its terminal phases in late 44, yeah, there's more and more uncertainty, and it seems it would have been a good idea to have some armed guards at your factory or bank, perhaps, or any number of other potential large institutions. But those companies are not going to be able to just go to the Wehrmacht and requisition some rifles. The Wehrmacht needs every gun it can get at this point. It's not giving them out to anyone else. And so I think some of these companies went to smaller gun shops like Langenham and said, hey, we need some rifles, a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe you put them all together and you get 1,000 guns in total. Can you get us some K98ks? And Langenham is able to go scrounge up all of the requisite parts, some of them rejects, some of them spares, some of them overruns, and actually assemble these guns. Because they're not going through the military, they are then proofed by the civilian proof house, and then they are transferred to the end buyers. So that also, I think, explains why these guns don't tend to have a lot of finish wear on them. They probably weren't used much in combat. They may not have been used in combat at all. If it's a factory guard and, you know, that guy sees the 1st Armored Division coming over the hill, he's probably not going to start shooting at them. He's probably going to lean that rifle up or just drop that rifle and give up. At any rate, there are some other theories. There are some theories that these rifles went to the Volkssturm. That would be based on the idea, actually kind of very similar, that by very late in the war, the Volkssturm are essentially left on their own in the individual German political districts to find their own arms. Again, the Wehrmacht needs all of its own guns. It's not going to be willingly giving a whole lot out to the Volkssturm. And so they're free to try and find and scrounge other guns. Late in the war, transportation really becomes a critical issue. I've heard reports from vets who were like at the capture of the Steyr factory, and they said there were racks and racks of MG42s in Steyr still sitting there at the end of the war because there was no, it was impossible for train traffic to move throughout Germany because any train that got moving would immediately be bombed by Allied air cover. And so the guns end up just staying in Steyr. They were desperately needed by the military units, but if you can't transport them, then what do you do? So Volkssturm units, the German Gau, the districts that are trying to arm their own units, well, maybe they were able to find some sort of guns locally and buy them off of factories or small shops. I don't think that's as legit a theory because I don't think those guns necessarily would have gone through the civilian proofing process. I think the factory owner idea here is a little more valid. There is also, of course, a theory that these guns went to the SS. That one I think is very unlikely to be true. While it is true that very early in the war, the SS had to do their own small arms procurement because the army didn't like them and the army wasn't going to give them stuff. By very late in the war, the tables had kind of turned. The SS had a tremendous amount of influence and power in the bureaucracy and could kind of take whatever they wanted at that point. So I don't see these being SS guns at all. I think factory guards are probably the most likely explanation for these. And I think while that's not the sexiest, most exciting answer, I think it's really interesting to have insight into just some of the non-standard goings-on in Germany at the end of World War II. So big thanks to Morpheus for giving me access to this pretty interesting, cool rifle to film for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.